Hello from the National Farm Machinery Show. I have with me Bob Hooten with FMC. And Bob, we're going to talk about, at least the topic, is below ground pest control and Ethos 3D insecticide and fungicide. So knowing that, what are some of the below ground limiting factors in crop production, and how are they different than above ground limiting functions?
Well, below ground, you have to worry about your root system. You want to protect your root system, have the largest root system very deep, because you want to bring in nutrients and you want to bring in water into the plant to build that ear. Things that we've seen in the past that affect that are wireworms, grubs, cutworms, and then rootworms, of course. And we've had a history with our Capture products, Capture LFR and Capture Thrive, in controlling those insects. Those insects are not the only thing that actually cuts that root system down. There's a lot of diseases, and we've just noticed that over the last few years. So we have history with the Capture products. It's some of the best performing out there and gives you the highest yields. We've added to the Capture a biological that grows along with the root system. It creates antipeptides, and it's helping control the Pythium, the Phytophthora, Fusarium, and Rhizoctonia. Works in corn or soybeans, and we've called that the Ethos brand. We have Ethos XB, which is in our LFR platform, so it mixes with starter fertilizer. And we now have Ethos 3D, which works with our Thrive system.
So when you're doing basically in-furrow protection, how does that help with yield and root growth, for example?
Well, I'll give you an example of what happened out in South Dakota. I was out in South Dakota. We dug this 8-foot pit. We noticed we had a clay barrier there about 18 inches down. So the root system grew to that level, and water sets on that clay barrier, and it rotted those roots. So the roots could only uptake water and nutrients from that area. Where we had put the Ethos, it protected those roots. They punched through that clay barrier, and they went 2 feet even deeper into the soil. So the larger your root system and the more surface area you have there, then the better utilization of water and nutrients and moisture. Now, a lot of farmers put a lot of nutrients into the soil, so how much actually gets lost and how much goes up? The bigger the root system, the more it goes up. So they get more return on investment from their fertilizer if they have a large root system. They've got to protect the root system. Best way to do it is with Ethos.
Well, that you just answered part of my next question. What do growers need to know about roots, and especially the different kinds of roots that a plant has?
Right. For the most part, we paid attention to the corn rootworm. Corn rootworm feeds on the brace roots. Brace roots really don't bring up any nutrients or moisture, but we have protected because they hold the plant up. You want to be able to harvest at the end of the year. What we have lacked is looking at the feeder roots, the finer roots, and we have allowed wireworms and grubs to explode across the corn belt for the most part. When I was out in Kansas City, we'd get 1 wireworm per bait station back in 1999. 2 years ago, we had 17 per bait station. Threshold is 1 per bait station. So it's 17 times what it used to be. And a lot of growers don't realize that they have all these critters out there that are feeding in June, July, and August. The bifenthrin component has a long residual, so it's controlling these critters back in June, July, and August, rather than just the seed treatment. They were relying on the seed treatment. Seed treatment's good for 2 weeks. Might get your seed out of the ground, but it's not going to protect your root system.
Yeah. So they're below ground. What are ways that a grower can, or can they see what's going on, things like digital imaging or others? Are there some tools they can use to help them in this whole process?
Well, here's what I suggest for growers to do. First off, in July, you dig your root system up. Do not hit it with a high-pressure washer because you'll peel all those hair roots off. Soak it in a bucket, use your garden hose, and look at the root system. If you're trying for 250 bushel corn, is that a 250 bushel root system, or is it a 150 bushel root system? The other thing that you can also, if you are putting a lot of inputs above ground and you're not seeing any benefit, and you are capped out at 50 bushel beans, I've had a lot of people come up and say, I've got 50 bushel beans, I got 180 bushel corn, I can't seem to break over that. It's probably because you're not paying attention to the root system and you need to protect it. So if you're not positive and you kind of wonder, try some Ethos and put strips out. And I think you'll be they will be very happy as to what they wind up with.
So you mentioned corn rootworm, but are there other seedling pests that growers need to be concerned about?
Yeah, the wireworms and the grubs feed a lot on the hair roots. They'll feed on the little seeds and prevent your seedling. We get a lot of extra stand also. We protect the stand and all those seeds you plant. Those seeds are pretty expensive today with all the genetics that's in them. So you really want every seed to come up. So we protect that, plus then we protect those root systems. Side effect is we get cutworm control. We'll also get armyworm control, things that are going to get those small little seedlings. We do a very good job with that with the Capture products or the Ethos products.
So I think it seems sort of obvious, but why don't you explain why having both, say an insecticide and other products together in furrow is important?
Well, you don't know what you're going to have. I had some trials out in Ohio. Ohio had a lot of wireworms and grubs, but they also had a cool, wet spring, so they had a lot of seedling diseases. So if your limiting factor is your root system, and you control one piece of it, the insects, then you may be losing out because your root system suffers from the diseases. If you just control the diseases, then you may suffer from the insects. Really, there's no real good way other than digging those roots and looking at them to know what you're going to have in the field. It's very difficult to tell. So something that's very relatively inexpensive, it's just a few bushels. You put that down, you get that protection, and then everything that you put on top, all that fertilizer, all the other inputs, you maximize out those inputs and you get the maximum yield. So your maximum return on investment. You really don't want to save $10 and lose $30. That's not the way to farm. You want to spend $10 and gain $40. So I'm not telling people that they're going to gain every single solitary time. You probably won't. But over time, you will make a very good return on investment.
Yeah, we've mentioned corn here, but what other crops can benefit from an in-furrow, using in-furrow technology?
Well, that secondary crop that we seem to plant in between the gold crop, corn on corn, is soybeans. Some people have learned that soybeans is the major producer for money, putting money in your pocket. Commodity prices. So what they have found is I've got 70, 80, 90 bushel soybean growers, not a lot of 90s, but in the 70, 80 range, because they are taking care of the inputs. They are putting things down to control the diseases and the insects. They realize those same insects feeding on corn, they don't care if it's a corn root or a soybean root, they'll feed on both. And wireworms and grubs are multi-year pests, especially perennial grubs. So if they're in your beans, they're going to be in your corn. If they're in your corn, they're going to be in your beans. And growers are learning that. And the ones that are actually taking good care of their soybean crop, then they're getting that 70 bushels. They've broken that 50 bushel barrier.
And then I guess that also maybe computes to having less problems if they go back to corn the next year because they've done that.
Yes, it does. And a couple of things, though, this is beyond the plant application. I have noticed lately, I've been here 40 years. 40 years ago, I didn't treat soybeans. There weren't any bugs on top. Soybeans, when they start to bloom, are very attractive. Blooms are attractive to bugs. It's like the dessert, and they come in. And I have noticed, I was in Owensboro, Kentucky, and I swept a bean field, had no blooms, couldn't find very many bugs. Adjacent field right beside it had blooms, and we had all types of bugs. We had stink bugs, you had grasshoppers, you had bean leaf beetle, you had a little bit of everything. It does not hurt to sweep your soybeans, see what's in there. If you've got something, spray one of our products like Hero over the top, and then that way you can control those bugs from laying eggs the next year in your corn.
Awesome. Well, really good advice there, and thank you very much. That's Bob Hooten with FMC. We've been visiting here at the National Farm Machinery Show. I'm Chuck Zimmerman.